So today we're going to think about the states of Europe, and that will help set the context for what we're about to talk about in relation to German nationalism and how German nationalism perhaps faces a challenge to change Europe from the way that it currently is. So first we have to think about Prussia. Prussia is going to be the most important state to talk about in the whole process of German unification because it is the state which will go on to unify Germany in 1871. So it's the most important German state, it's the most important European state really to think about. And it's a long path to getting there. Initially, Prussia is very much opposed to German unification, but eventually it comes to realize that it's the right thing to do for its own expansion of power. Now, Prussia was ruled by the Hohenzollern royal family, and they will go on to be the royal family of Germany itself, at least during the Second Reich of the Kaisers from 1871 to about 1918, most famously probably Kaiser Wilhelm II. Now, Prussia is ruled by this elite social class called the Junkers, and they are landowning aristocrats. They're also very much involved in the military. They lead the military of Prussia, and then will go on really to also dominate Germany, at least in its first few years, and the German military, and continue to have an impact on the German military really even beyond the Second Reich, going into the Third Reich as well. Now, Prussia controls territory which is really outside of modern-day Germany and even outside the Holy Roman Empire of the time, now in territory which would be around Poland, modern-day Poland. But it had been growing in power rapidly over the last century, so it's been really growing. It was really not a very important state at all about a century before 1789, but now it's grown through this very significant power. And it's risen to power because of one man, which is Frederick the Great, and he leads these great campaigns and will put Prussia on the map in a very literal sense. Now, Prussia is still second rate compared to Austria. Austria is really the dominant power, the dominant German power in Europe, or in what was called Germany, thought of as being Germany. But it is slowly becoming this great power by 1789, and it had an extremely powerful and expert army. That's really what it's known for and what it's defined by, its army. It's a very militaristic sort of society. It's also a sort of educational society as well, strong focus on education, as we'll see, but it's mainly known for its military and its military might. The next then is Austria. Now, it's difficult to talk about an Austria at this point because Austria exists as a kind of archduchy, but it's not really talked about as the Austrian Empire. It's more the Habsburg Empire. So it might be better to refer to Austria as the Habsburg Empire at this point, but I'll just call it Austria to keep things simple. So Austria is one of Europe's great powers and the dominant German power at this point in time. And the Germans were the dominant ethnic group in what might be called the Austrian or the Habsburg Empire of the time. And they ruled numerous territories which are outside of modern-day Austria. If we look on this map here, the sort of red section is the section of the empire which is actually modern-day Austria. But the Austrian Empire of the time is ruling a great deal of territory. And the problem for the Austrian Empire is that it's made up of all these different ethnic groups. And what that means is that nationalism is going to be a huge problem for them. If people are pushing for each nation, each group of people to have their own state, their own independent state, well, that's going to completely split up the Austrian Empire. There's going to be no Austrian Empire anymore. The German part will split off, the part in red, if German nationalism is successful and join a new Germany. The Hungarian part of the Austrian Empire in the sort of black will want to form its own state, a Hungarian state. The Romanians will want Romania, the Serbs will want Serbia, and so on. So Austria, the Austrian Empire, is the most at threat, the most at risk from nationalism and particularly from German nationalism, because the Germans are kind of the group which are keeping the Austrian Empire together in that sense. Now, there's even more territories out of the map that I've just shown you. The people who ruled the Austrian Empire, the Habsburgs, the Habsburg royal family, are also ruling over Spain. They're also ruling over the Netherlands, much of Italy as well. So it's this huge empire that's ruled by this one family, the Habsburgs. And the Habsburgs are a very successful royal family, as I said, ruling over all this territory. They're also a family which has got its power through alliances, and these alliances are really marriage alliances, but also through inbreeding, through keeping things in the family. And that's why the people suggest they have this very specific sort of facial feature, which is this extended sort of chin, known as the, jaw, known as the Habsburg jaw, because of inbreeding, created through inbreeding. So they've been able to maintain their power through inbreeding, through keeping it in the family. But it's also ultimately leading to them having quite a lot of issues as well. So we know the negative impacts of inbreeding that can occur, and that ultimately becomes sort of their undoing in some cases, particularly in Spain. So this royal family has gained huge power through these political marriage alliances, through this sort of interbreeding. And at its height, under Charles V, the man you see there on the right, in the 1500s, he had been on the thrones of Spain, over the Holy Roman Empire, over much of Italy, and actually ruled territories including much of the Americas, this huge tract of territory in South America, and actually going even further up into sort of Central America as well. And so it's really important to emphasize just how powerful the Habsburgs were and how they still are at this point. They're still a power, although perhaps not quite as powerful as they once were. But under Charles V, his rule is known as the universal monarchy, because this one monarch is ruling over so much of the world. And it's actually called the Empire on which the sun never sets. We probably think that's the name that was given to the British Empire, but it was actually first used of this empire, the Empire of the Habsburgs, the Empire of Charles V. Now, most importantly for us, thinking about Germany, since the 1500s, the Habsburgs have also been the leaders or the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. They are the people who rule over the empire. And what essentially can be thought of as being Germany is the Holy Roman Empire at this point. And so these marriage alliances and this desire to keep power within the family has kept them successful, but it's also led to this great deal of inbreeding. And these are the people who are ruling over the Austrian Empire. And it will really be a battle. It will be a battle between Austria and Prussia, the Austrian Empire and the Prussian kingdom, to be the ones to have control over Germany. So it's important to follow this battle. This is this sort of ongoing battle. It's the Habsburgs versus Hohenzollerns. Hohenzollerns being the Prussian royal family, Habsburgs being the Austrian royal family, and they will battle for dominance over Germany. You've also got France, which will be very important in relation to future events, culminating in the unification of Germany. At this point, they are the great power of Europe. You know, today we think of Germany being very much the center of power, but at this point, France is really the dominant power. This is really a peak of power for France. Now, obviously, under Napoleon, they'll have this very brief super peak of power, but it doesn't last particularly long. But at this point, France really is the power. Now, it is struggling, fighting against Britain. There are some very unfortunate setbacks for the French, as Britain is also rising. But it really is at its peak, in a sense. And you have Louis XIV, earlier in the century, who is sort of the Sun King, known as the Sun King, because he is the absolute power. There's that famous phrase, "L'État c'est moi," the state is me. So all power, all governance is centered in this one person. And France is the leading absolutist power in Europe. Absolutism is the idea that there should be all power in the hands of the monarchy, and no power really should exist outside of that. It's autocratic, absolute power for a monarchy. Compare that to a constitutional monarchy, where the monarch is limited by parliament and other forces. And probably most famous display of that absolutism, the most famous display of French power and the power of the monarchs, is in the Palace of Versailles, which you can still visit today, and shows off the great wealth and grandeur of the French monarchy. Okay, so we've thought a little bit about the different powers. We've thought a lot about politics. We've thought a lot about politics in relation to Germany and German nationalism, but we haven't thought about what is the social and economic system in Germany. Now, as I've been saying today, if you think of the most powerful economic power in Europe, you probably think of Germany. Germany's very successful at sort of holding all the strings, isn't it, of power and money in the European Union. But at this point, Germany is very behind. It's massively behind Britain. It's massively behind Western Europe. And one significant reason for that is because it is very backwards in terms of its social and economic organization. It is still operating the kind of feudal system. The feudal system being this very unequal, hierarchical system where all power economically is centered in the hands of just a few. So it's a social and economic order where there exist strict divisions of society. There's large class of peasants, a small number of urban workers, barely any at this point, and an even smaller middle class. The middle class is pretty much non-existent at this point, and a very privileged aristocracy. They hold all the power. 80% of Germans lived and worked on the land. So it's a very agricultural society. In the West, there's a bit more freedom for the very poor, for the peasants, but they are burdened by rent, they are burdened by the tithes that they still have to pay to the church or churches, and labour dues. Now in the East, it's even worse for people. In the East, there is still serfdom. Serfs being essentially peasants who are forced to remain on the land and work for a landowner. They have pretty much no freedom. They're almost like slaves. So Germany is very backwards at this point, economically, socially. It's also backwards and struggling because you've got 314 different states, loads of different states in Germany. And those different states all have different currencies, they have different weights, they have different measures. They've got barriers, custom barriers, trade barriers between each state. And the different states don't have very good communications with each other. So imagine how hard that is to do just a little bit of trading, to trade one resource over one part of Germany to another. You have to go through tons of different states, paying taxes to those different states as you pass through. It's impossible for Germany to grow economically. It's very much like the debates that have been had in the last few years about Britain leaving the EU and how being part of the European Union has arguably allowed trade to increase and be much smoother, whereas since Britain has left the European Union, it's become a lot more difficult. And obviously the arguments of those who wanted Britain to stay in the European Union was about economic growth and how Britain could grow much better economically if there weren't barriers, trade barriers between it and Europe. And it's the same situation for Germany. Germany is so divided, 314 different states, they can't properly trade, they can't properly grow economically. Also, you have the issue of skilled workers belonging to these very powerful guilds, and these guilds very much operate like a monopoly, and we know also that monopolies can be problematic towards competition. Again, preventing German growth, preventing innovation and new sort of businesses and ideas from getting out there, because these sort of guilds, these organizations that these skilled workers belong to, seek to defend their privileges, and they stop anyone from coming up and from competing against them. it's like the big companies, the big tech companies, with like Facebook and well, Instagram is part of Facebook, isn't it? But all those different organizations that exist out there, TikTok, etc. Now, in Germany, it's very much like that. 1789, it's very much like that. There is a monopoly. Also, the aristocracy own most of the land, and they hold the key posts in all the various courts, the armies, and the administrations. Now, you might think, well, how's that going to hold back Germany economically? What we'd say is that it means that Germany is not a meritocracy. In other words, it doesn't select the best people for the best jobs. It instead selects the most privileged people for the best jobs. And what that means is many of these privileged people are actually not necessarily the most competent. They're not necessarily the most skilled. So you're getting a lot of people in the highest positions who actually don't know necessarily what they're doing. And there's all this unused talent, this wasted talent amongst the rest of the population. They're not being selected to the good jobs. Germany is not a meritocracy. And again, that means you can't have the best people, you can't be competitive against the other states of Europe, and you can't grow economically. And that could also be something which is holding Germany back economically. So we've painted quite a negative picture for Germany. It's very divided, it's backwards economically, it's backwards in a social sense as well. But we're about to look at the French Revolution next time, and the French Revolution will completely change things. The French Revolution will transform Germany, and it will really lead to the creation of German nationalism, which will change the situation for Germany. Thank you for watching.